Good day. This is Jove Aguas, and welcome to my lectures in ethics. And for this lecture, I will be talking about the ethics of Saint Augustine. So, introduction. Saint Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, and one of the early fathers of the Church, followed the idealist tradition set by Plato, and he was also influenced by the writings of the Apostle Saint Paul. So, the philosophy of Saint Augustine is a combination of Pauline theology and Platonic idealism. In his writings, we find an eloquent expression of the process of reconciling the Greek emphasis on reason with the emphasis on religious emotions in the teachings of Christ and the apostles. St. Augustine argues that religious faith and philosophical understanding are complementary rather than opposed, and that one must believe in order to understand and understand in order to believe. So we can say that St. Augustine was one of the first advocates of the complementariness of faith and reason. Because later philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas would sort of work on the complementarity between faith and reason. St. Augustine considers the soul as having a higher form of existence than the body. And he teaches that knowledge consists in the contemplation of the Platonic ideas, meaning uh, the ideas of the good, the ideas of justice, of beautiful, etc., that have been purified of both sensation and imagery. So this is something that he acquired from Plato. He combines the Neoplatonic notion of the one, and the main proponent of this Neoplatonic notion, one of the homostasis of being, is Plotinus, with the Christian concept of a personal God who created the world and predestined its course. So, Neo, the Neoplatonic philosophers, especially Plotinus, thought of the three uh, sort of hierarchy of beings. In the hierarchy, you have one as the highest, and then you have the nous, then you have the soul, and then, of course, at the bottom is matter. And that influence, that idea of Plotinus, influenced the thoughts of St. Augustine. St. Augustine explains the doctrine of the fall of humanity, requiring the divine incarnation of the Son of God, Christ, and provides a rational solution to the problems of the free will and predestination. The existence of evil in a world created by a perfect and all powerful God. He asserts that real happiness is impossible in the world of the living, where even with good fortune, awareness of approaching death would mar any tendency toward satisfaction. Therefore, the only possible or ultimate happiness, real happiness, is only possible in the kingdom of God. He believes that without the religious virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which require divine grace to be attained, a person cannot develop the natural virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. The natural virtues or the moral virtues are the virtues that Aristotle and Plato taught. And St. Augustine added to this the theological virtue or the religious virtues of faith, hope, and charity. So we have to understand that St. Augustine is actually combining the Greek philosophy and Christian doctrines, the the Christian theological doctrines. Okay. The ethical principle. Main focus is the divine truth or God. So for Saint Augustine, the highest being, the uncreated, the creator himself, the supreme being is God. The God is the truth, the divine truth. St. Augustine's philosophy may be divided into three main parts. First is the description of the existence and nature of the truth, meaning nature of God. So think when I say the truth, the divine truth, that means God, where he defends the existence of God from criticisms and explains God's existence and the nature of God and the attributes of God. In the second part of his philosophy, he discussed about the creative works of God, of the truth, where he explains the actions of God like creation and the principles which governs God's creative works. The third is the possession of the truth. The possession of the truth, meaning our way back to God. So here he explains how the creatures, particularly us human beings, can find our way back to God through stages of detachment and purifications. And this contains his ethical or moral thoughts. So we will, in this discussion, I will focus on the third, possession of the truth, meaning how man can return back to God. So the possession of truth, meaning the return of man to God, is the source of happiness and the rule of morality for man. The possession of truth is based on the principle of return. Because for St. Augustine, we came from God, okay? We were detached because of sin, we were separated from God. And in order for us to be happy, we have to return back to God. That's the principle of return. Our love is a direct participation in the subsisting goodness, meaning that good is also God, in such a manner that it is God whom we love in creatures as his reflection. So the idea of St. Augustine is that God created the world. So all that he created in the world are reflections of his goodness. So if we love these things in the world, we love them because they reflect the goodness of God, who is the creator of these things. So ultimately, according to Saint Augustine, it is God whom we love through the creatures or through the things that He created. As a creature of God, there is a natural urge or drive within us, human beings, to return to the source of our being. So God is the source of our being. We're separated because of sin, but there is always that natural urge to go back to God. Although we achieve a certain degree of happiness, although we achieve a certain degree of happiness in the physical things, for they are reflections of God's goodness, we cannot conceive of true happiness without the permanence which only God assures. So, well, we can have a certain degree of happiness with the physical things, with the material things, but the real happiness is in God. That's the only happiness that you know will give us assurance of ultimate happiness. So it's impossible to attain true happiness here in this world. Well, we can be happy to a certain degree, for it can only provide us with things that are temporary and fleeting. Things here, they may reflect God's goodness, but they are temporary and fleeting. So again, that sounds very similar to what Hinduism and Buddhism are talking about, the temporariness, you know, the impermanence of this world. The ultimate end of man. God is the supreme object and the natural goal of our activity, the ultimate resting place of our love. Since our desire for happiness is a love of God, there's no created good, no physical thing, no physical object can ever capture our heart except by presenting a reflection of the absolute good and by portraying the countenance of God. Therefore, our heart will always be, desire these things because they cannot fully satisfy our heart. That's why in Saint Augustine, in his Confessions, the book Confession, he said, "My heart is restless until it rests in you," meaning he acquired, achieved ultimate happiness when his heart finally rested in God. Okay? So the movement of love can find repose only in God. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee. All men desire happiness and peace, and everything is directed towards this goal of being united with God. Now, next point, the two loves, the two cities. One of the books that St. Augustine wrote, or two of his famous books, was The City of God. The other one is The Confession, his autobiography. The City of God, he talks about the two cities, the city of man, the world, and the city of God, heaven. Okay. So the material man desires only a material happiness and a temporal peace. The spiritual man, on the other hand, the man who loves God, seeks a spiritual happiness and an eternal peace. So you have temporal peace here and eternal happiness, spiritual happiness, eternal peace in heaven. These two loves produce two types of human beings and two types of states here, two states here in the world. The earthly city is built up by the love of self to the contempt of God, and the heavenly is built up by the love of God to the contempt of the self. I quote St. Augustine here. In the city of the world, both the rulers themselves and the people they dominate are dominated by the lust for domination. Whereas in the city of God, all citizens serve one another in charity, whether they serve by the responsibilities of office or by the duties of obedience. So the city of God that he's talking here is, of course, the church. Okay. The two cities based on the two loves of men cannot be separated. The good and the bad citizens that are mixed. The real purpose of the citizens should be to attain harmonious living with each other and peace among men. The earthly dwelling is a temporal and is a shadow of the higher dwelling, which is in heaven. The earthly society must follow the ideal heavenly state, that it must live in accord and in concord and with peace of righteous men in union among themselves under God and in God's presence. The heavenly city uses also the earthly peace in the course of its earthly pilgrimage. So you have the heavenly city here. Eventually, that heavenly city will transcend into the kingdom of God. But while the heavenly city is still here, it is on its early pilgrimage, it also utilizes earthly peace or the temporal peace. That's why the church must also work hand in hand with the state. Okay, they're separate, but they have to work hand in hand because, of course, they can complement. They can complement each other. It cherishes the desires without compromising its faith and devotion, the orderly coherence of men's concerns about their moral nature. So, to the extent that it the faith and devotion of the church will not be compromised, it will always participate, cooperate with the state. Earthly peace is important in attainment of heavenly peace. Next point, the human person as a wanderer and his ultimate end. So we go now to how we are going to return now to God. Man is an intermediate creature between brutes and angels, meaning the animals, and the angels. A rational animal with a body and soul, guided and ordered by the loving providence of a personal God. Man has two characteristic faculties, the intellect and the will. The end of the intellect is the possession of the truth, while the end of the will is to be united with the good. So, intellect, truth, will, the good. The truth and the good are united into one being, and that is God Himself. So God is the truth, God is also the good. So our intellect desires to know the truth, and our will loves the good. But this truth and good are united into one, which is God. So the object of our intellect and the object of our will is God Himself. So the union and possession of God is the ultimate destiny of man. But man, because he is also physical, he exists and lives in a space-time continuum, in a physical world. Okay? He's also a man of this world, and true to his material nature, he also loves or desires the object of this world. So, but although man is in the world because he has a body, he is not of the world because he has a spiritual nature, and his soul cannot find fulfillment in the world. So, man is both physical and spiritual. Yes, because of his body, he belongs to the world, but he does not totally belongs to the world because he's also spiritual. He also belongs to heaven or to God. So it is the divine in man that directs him towards his ultimate end and destiny, which is heavenly happiness, being united with the truth and the good, God Himself. The divine image is the compass of human life. However, when it was shattered by sin, remember the fall of Adam, original sin, man became lost and disoriented. He became a stranger to his own nature, a stranger to his destiny, a stranger to himself. So the fall of man, now, in the Garden of Eden, that started the estrangement, the separation of man from God. So man became a stranger to his own nature because he was supposed to be united with God, but because of this sin, he became a total stranger to his destiny and to himself. Man's spiritual disorientation is likened to a group of wanderers who wanted to return to their homeland. So we were separated, we wandered about, and now we wanted to return to the Father, or we want to return to God. It's like the story of the prodigal son. Like wanderers, man seek to return to his fatherland or homeland, which is the kingdom of God. Man's spiritual journey, huh, in man's life. So for Augustine, our life is like a journey, a spiritual journey. We want to return, but it is often distracted by the things of this world, and is continually entrapped in its temporal and material grandeur. We think this is the right place. We think this is the perfect place, but this is not. We are being distracted by the glitters of this world. And that's why sometimes we are disoriented. Sometimes we cannot go back. No, we cannot follow the course because of there's so many distractions of the glitters of this world. Man's excessive love for the world is a love that degrades man's own nature and true destiny. Man cannot ascend to God without being detached from creatures or from worldly things. So therefore we have to abandon all our attachment to this worldly happiness. Again, very much similar to what Buddhism tells us, that we have to detach ourselves from the world. So, virtues entails an intellectual and moral purification through which our intellect and our will progressively detach from every sensible object. So we have to detach intellectually and morally from all these, worldly things. And what will help us do that is our virtue. The goal of this detachment and purification in this life is, of course, the future life, where man can have a loving contemplation of God in heaven on virtue and happiness. Virtue is the perfection of a reasonable life through which one loves that which one ought to love by conforming oneself to the order of creation. to the order of creation. So when God created the world, He put order into it, and we have to conform ourselves to this order of creation. And of course, the order of creation is the commands, the precepts of God. It constitutes our progress towards happiness. For reason tells us to conform all our activities to the order of creation, because the order of creation is an order of reason. Okay, so our reason must conform to this order, to the providence, okay, to the laws of God. The virtues are important for they are those that temper our worldly desires. Through the virtues, man is able to detach himself from worldly pleasures. The law, as the highest reason, is united to the will of God, determining and preserving the natural order. And as we have already discussed in some of the video presentations of my lectures, we say that the law is an order of reason. So the highest reason is God's reason, and therefore the highest law is God's law. And God determined the laws in order to preserve the natural order that He created into the world. And therefore we have to follow the law of God. Law and virtue are related so that virtue governs all our activities in order that law, no, in the order which law obliges us to preserve. What is the role of the will here? Of course, the object of the will is, the function of the will is to love the good. And it is necessary to love in order to know, and not vice versa. And that's Saint Augustine. It's necessary to love in order to know. For Saint Augustine, the will takes precedence over the intellect in this manner. If in man, the will is directed by the intellect in its pursuit of its proper object, which is the good. We love the good. We love God. God is the highest good. So since the first love must be God, then all other loves must be subordinated to this first love. Love signifies order. A moral act is an act based on love, while sin is an act of hatred, and it is for sin is separation. So when we love, we are unified. When we sin, we are separated. Love is an act of union. Hatred is an act of separation. The good will and the happy life. The eternal law and the temporal law are good. Of course, the eternal law is always good because that is the law of God. The temporal law must also be good because it is a law. Because according to Saint Augustine, an unjust law is never a law at all. Because the main objective of the law is to put order and justice. And if a law is not just, then it is not a law at all. Both the eternal and the temporal law guarantee a perfect order, meaning a life lived perfectly. Man possesses reason, and therefore he has the possibility to not only live, but to live with reason and understanding. We don't only live, we should live well. And we can only live well if we follow our reason, if we live with reason. Man can live well when the impulses of the soul, meaning the emotions, the passions, the desires, the fears, the angers, are guided by reason. So, again, this is very similar to what Plato said in the Republic, in our discussion on Plato, that it should always be reason that should supervise all the other passions and appetites of men. If reason rules, then the person is wise. Otherwise, the person is a fool. So human wisdom consists in the rule of the mind. But it is possible that the mind does not rule. It is the choice of man whether to follow the rule of reason or not. When the mind or reason has control and one possesses the virtue, he cannot be made slave to inordinate desire. He will always, the reason will always take control over our desire. Hence, it's only by one's will and free choice that we can make our mind a slave to our selfish desire. If we allow, ourselves to be slave to our selfish desire, then it's by our own choice, by our own free will. A good will is a will by which we desire to live upright and honorable lives, and to attain the highest wisdom. A good will is worth more than wealth or honor or physical pleasure, because that is the will that will give us the highest wisdom and eventually will lead us to happiness. It is in the will's own power to be good or be bad. Thus, it is up to us whether we are good or bad. So the thing is, we have to desire, to will to be good. A good will allows us to have the virtues of prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. And possessing these virtues makes our life happy. Therefore, it lies in our own will's power to be happy or not. But it's not enough to will to be happy. St. Augustine said, one must will it in the right way. One must deserve happiness. Oftentimes, we complain why we are not happy. Well, in the first place, because we don't will to be happy. We don't will to be good. It's only by being good that we can be happy. But we do not will to be good. That's why we are not happy. And the second and more important thing is that we complain why we are not happy. But another thing that is very important is to ask is, do we deserve happiness? We have to make ourselves deserving of happiness if we want to be happy. So thank you very much for listening. That ends my presentation. I hope you gain uh, a lesson or two from this discussion. And please be safe, take care, and God bless.